Hello and good morning. Welcome to the Postal Regulatory Commission's off-the-record public technical conference in consolidated dockets number RM 2024-9, PI 2025-2, and PI 2025-5. I'm Lauren D'Agostino with the Commission's Office of General Counsel. Thank you for joining us and for participating in this proceeding. We have a few quick housekeeping notes before we begin. First, notice and consent to recording. This meeting will be recorded. To record this meeting, all mics, cameras, and screen sharing will be disabled initially. Reactivating any of these features will prompt a consent message, and by doing so, you are agreeing to be recorded. This meeting is also being streamed on YouTube with a short delay of about 10 to 15 seconds. The recordings will remain available on YouTube afterward. Only the organizers can enable your mic, camera, or screen sharing ability. To speak, please use the Raise Your Hand feature. When recognized for the first time, please state your name and your affiliation. Designated presenters may share their screens when helpful to the discussion. Meeting chat is disabled. Please use the Q&A feature to contact the organizers with logistical issues, such as requesting a break or reporting technical difficulties. If you are having technical problems, please refer to the guide sent with your agenda or contact us through the Q&A. We appreciate your patience as we work through any tech issues. We remind everyone to maintain professionalism and decorum throughout the session. A few reminders about the purpose of today's conference. This is an informal, off-the-record opportunity to discuss technical issues concerning the matters identified in Order Number 8942, the Postal Service's response to Commission Information Request Number 7, and the evaluation of the Postal Service's Internal Service Performance Measurement, or SPM, system. This is not a forum for argument or broader discussion on the case. While the session is being recorded and streamed for transparency, it will not be transcribed, nor will it be included in the formal record. Statements made today are not evidence and may not be cited in filings. We ask participants to avoid unnecessary repetition and objections. The Postal Service is encouraged to engage on both technical and broader policy questions to support the Commission's evaluation where it can. If the Postal Service indicates that further information can be provided in response to today's discussion, and you want that information put on the record, file a motion for an information request. Finally, if you wish to file written comments in this docket, instructions are available on the Commission's website. Written comments are due July 24, 2025, and replies to other participants' comments are due July 31, 2025. For today's technical discussion, we have subject matter experts on behalf of the Postal Service, as well as their support staff, including Steve Dering, Vice President and Chief Data and Analytics Officer, Arslan Salim, Director, Corporate Performance, Reporting and Analytics. We also have Commission personnel, including Mr. J.P. Klingenberg, who is the subject matter expert on behalf of the Commission's Office of Accountability and Compliance, as well as Tim Boone with the Commission's Office of General Counsel. Also with us here today, we have the public representative team led by Ms. Manon Boudreau. And without further ado, we will recognize the Postal Service's representatives, Vice President Dering and Director Salim, to begin the discussion. And I believe that they may have slides that they wish to present, in which case we will give them presenter privileges. Hi, Mr. Salim, we see you. We don't hear you. You're muted.
All right, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we see and hear you.
Okay. All right. Looks like Mr. Dering has his hand raised. Yep.
Hey, so good morning and thank you, Lauren. My name is Steve Deering. I am the Vice President and Chief Data Analytics Officer for the Postal Service. And we do have a presentation to help, basically portray the information that the PRC requested. And I'm glad that you noted that, this is related to the service performance measurement changes, and we'll stay on focus with that. So Arslan, if you could bring up your screen, we can go ahead and get started.
Sure.
So, as I indicated, this is on service performance measurement. Arslan, next slide, please. And we do have, it broken down by an overview of service performance measurement, basically a very short history on it. And then, of course, the specifics as it's related to the changes related to our ability to measure down to a zip code level, which includes leg 1 measurement and leg 3 measurement, which were the majority of the questions that came from the Regulatory Commission. Next slide, Arslan. So I've been involved in service performance measurement for over a decade now, and it's always been a journey of continuous improvement. The current measurement system that we have today is quite robust and leverages measuring live mail. That is mail that's dropped in mailboxes for single piece first class, and mail that's entered to the Postal Service by our pre-sort mailers. We measure what we can if it meets the qualification of it. I mean, we can uniquely identify the pieces and track the entry of those pieces, and it's robust, right? We have a census measurement of virtually everything we can identify individually to the tune of over 20 billion pieces a quarter. That's not a small number, 20 billion pieces a quarter. Now that's the census piece of it. But we also want to measure the end-to-end state, which involves including, sampling methodologies or surveys, if you're looking at it from a statistical perspective. But it involves sampling to help measure the entry or acceptance of a mail piece, whether it's single piece or pre-sort. But for single piece, it would be from that acceptance at the customer location to the first processing operation, what we call leg 1 today. And then it's also the measurement from that last processing operation to the customer mailbox, which we call leg 3 today, right? And the combination of that sampling methodology in leg 1 and that sampling methodology in leg 3 with that census measurement, of course, with all of the logic that's in between, allows us to have this holistic end-to-end measurement of the product line, across a tremendous volume. Like I said, over 20 billion pieces a quarter, and it gives us incredibly valuable information to help understand where the pinch points are and to help work with our operational partners in rectifying those pinch points and making improvements. It's incredibly accurate, 95% confidence level with really tight low margins of errors when it's done at the district and quarterly level. And we do have an independent audit that happens every quarter to validate, the accuracy of our measurement system. Now, I'm going to offer that is great when you're reporting it at the district and quarter level. However, when you start looking at measurement down to a 5-digit level and our ability to measure down to a 5-digit level, then you start working in regards to statistics, and that comes down to the volume that's associated with what's in census measurement and the sampling that's involved in leg 1 and leg 3. And I'd like to say that it's going to be 100%, 95% confidence level down to a 1% all across the board in every 5-digit, but that's just not reality, right? We don't have mail volume in every 5-digit going to every 5-digit. I'd like to. That would be wonderful for the organization and our fiscal health, but in a declining mail volume, that's just not happening, right? We continue to see volume declines, and this new approach to service performance measurement helps us measure at the 5-digit zip code level and aligns to the PRC request to do so. So, I believe it's, what you're going to see today is going to help you understand our approach on that. It leverages, our operational processes. It leverages technology, something that we continue to look at to help us drive accuracy and precision. And it also leverages, some of the, let's say, legacy processes that we've seen in the past, such as seeding, and also incorporates a new aspect of measurement, which are packages. And we'll go into those in detail. But from a general overview, we are, very, very, very cognizant of our accuracy. We want to be reliable and representative, and we have every intent of continuing to do so, but it does require a different approach. Next slide, Arson. So from a general perspective, as I stated, I've been involved in measurement for a while, and we had this measurement system that was called EXFC for single piece first class mail. And we moved towards an internal SPM back in 2019 because, we had a way of doing it, leveraging live mail, much more robust, and allowed us to, gain incredible intelligence and be incredibly accurate in our representation of service performance measurement. So what you're looking at on this slide is a comparison of data as it's related to Q1 of FY25 from our current service performance measurement and Q1 of FY18 of the previous external measurement, which was the last year it was in effect before cutover. And so the external measurement system used to use test mail, or what we called seed pieces. The current system uses live mail. Every single piece that we can get a license plate barcode on, we measure, and we get a lot of it in our census measurement for Leg 2. Now, in addition, we're able to measure, based upon that license plate barcode, 3.1 billion pieces in Q1 of FY25. Compared to 527,000 that was done in the previous external measurement. And in regards to the entry points or the collection boxes where people were entering mail, we actually have intelligence on mail coming from 62% of those collection boxes in Q1. That means that we received sample intelligence to say, hey, is this stuff working? And I would offer, with the newly introduced approach on service performance measurement, that's going to bump up to 100%. Because we're going to leverage operational processes and validate those processes. But the prior system only measured at 11% of collection point entries, right? 11%. Is that representative? It was statistically valid if you're to look at it from a statistics perspective, but I'd offer that representation is all, interpreted by the data. And I would offer that the representation that we have in the current service performance measurement is good. 62% in Q1 of FY25, but it'll even be better when we implement the operational processes that allow us to get down to a 5-digit level. And when you're looking at the specifics of pieces captured in Leg 1, the single piece, we had 3.6 million pieces captured in Q1. And once again, 527,000 pieces dropped. Now, that's just a measure from the acceptance to that first, processing hit. Incredible intelligence, incredibly valuable. And when it comes down to the delivery point or the customer experience of receiving mail, every single delivery point has the opportunity to be sampled in the current measurement system. And in regards to the external system, it was basically 16,000 what they called reporters. 16,000. Now we have more than 16,000 zip codes. So, if you look at the number of, potential delivery points sampled of 165 million plus, I think it's up to 167 now, but I know for sure it's over 165. We basically did samples for 14 million of those delivery points. That's a pretty large population across the country to do sampling in. Meanwhile, the external measurement system had 16,000. Now, if you think about that, that's 16,000 that was to report for the entire country. So if you're looking at representativeness on the current state versus the legacy, in the current state, you could have, one side of a particular city that shares the same zip code being measured, and the other part of the city being measured, and basically all parts of the city being measured. However, with the external system, you might have one reporter in that relatively large zip code, and if they received a great customer experience and got their mail every single day, that was reported as such for that entire zip code. Meanwhile, if there was somebody on the other side of town that didn't get their mail every single day or had it, happen sporadically, they would never get caught because the measurement was specific on those individual reporters that were recording their mail. And in delivery, 19 million pieces. 19 million pieces were sampled at delivery compared to 3.1 million that were being received against the 16,000 reporters. So, that's quite a lot of mail going to those 16,000, 3.1 million pieces going to 16,000 reporters. That's a lot of volume going to those addresses. Does it represent what's happening in a declining mail volume scenario? I'll leave that for your interpretation. Now, another key aspect of the current measurement system is we measure remittance mail. That wasn't included in the external EXFC portion of it. We also measure mail going to businesses. That was also not included in the external measurement process because, these were seated people. This is people that basically they solicited to report their mail. They didn't have people involved in businesses and they didn't measure remittance mail because, that was a different process that was outside the scope of how they could measure that volume. So in short, the current measurement system, it's not perfect. I mean, surveys in general are not perfect, right? You can't expect to be 100% accuracy, which is why we have 95% confidence level and margins of error, right? And as we move towards the new approach to do it at a 5-digit level, we're going to continue to be incredibly accurate at a quarter level at the district level. And then it depends on how much volume there is and how much volume you're able to incorporate into your profiles from a sampling and package perspective that will determine your margins of error and the statistical validity down at the 5-digit level. Next slide, Arslan. So in short, we have a plan that will give us accurate, reliable, and representative service performance measurement down to the 5-digit zip code level, and it's also cost effective. As I stated previously, we're going to maintain our accuracy at the district and quarter level, within the tight margins that we currently have, and that's all dependent on declining mail volumes, right? Because all of our data is based upon those actual live mail volumes, and as product continues to decline, then those populations change and those confidence levels and margins of errors change. And it also allows us to go down to that 5-digit zip code level on a weekly basis. And, prior to my, in alignment with my prior statement, as you get lower in granularity with volumes and or available pieces to sample, that becomes, an equation of statistics on how you can actually calculate accurate service performance measurement, leveraging what data you have at your disposal. And it basically aligns with our operational processes. The one thing that the Postal Service does exceptionally well every single day is accept, process, and deliver mail. Are we where we need to be from a service performance measurement? Not where I'd like to be, that's for sure. But the bottom line is we're able to measure it accurately, and we are able to, continue to provide information in regards to service performance scores, and we have every intent to continue to do so in our 5-digit zip code measurement approach. And I'm going to take a pause there and let Arslan shift to the next slide because I am turning it over to Mr. Salim to get into the technical approach on this.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Deering. Thank you for the overview of the background on our current approach and then the new approach. To enable measurement at the 5-digit zip code level, we have to make updates, right, to the leg 1 methodology and the leg 3 methodology. And So as Mr. During mentioned, we are leveraging technology. We are leveraging operational processes that our employees do day in, day out. And I would say they're exceptionally well at doing that, right? So essentially, utilization of the collection box scanning, and verifying that against, the geofencing data, GPS data, breadcrumb data, and utilization of growing product line, which is to capture the packages on the routes, and in addition to that, also utilization of the packages that are accepted at the retail window, and verifying all that data, utilizing passive technology like GPS, breaking up the geofence, trying to figure out, when the volume arrives at the post office, and then comparing that against, when the transportation from the post office to the plant departs, to determine, whether the carriers are back to the post office before that transportation leaves, and capturing when the volume is getting processed at those origin plants, right? So that will allow us to measure the performance in leg one, which is essentially looking at the volume that's being collected from the blue boxes, packages that are being collected on the route, and then the volume that's being entered through the retail channels. Then the second, measurement leg is the leg two, which is essentially from the origin plant to the destination plant. And the way we measure that is essentially, measurement from when we take the possession at the plant to the last scan at the destination plant, and there's no change in how we measure leg two. And the way we determine is whether if the pieces is on time or not is comparing the service standards from the origin location to the final destination, right? And in this case, the service standards are set at the 5-digit zip code level. And then the third leg in the measurement approach is from the destination plant to the customer's mailbox, right? So we call that leg three, which is essentially measurement of the product from the destination plant, to the post office and ultimately to the delivery point. And we'll go in more detail in each one of these two legs that are changing, leg one and leg three. But the intent is to utilize the processes that our employees do on day in, day out, utilizing the the operational flows that are, we've been doing it for decades, right? You process volume, you transport volume, you deliver volume, right? And the volume gets moved together, right? So essentially from leg one perspective, right? Mail and packages get collected. They get transported to the post office. From there, they get transported to the plants. And same thing from a destination perspective in leg three, volume gets processed. They get transported to the post office, and then they go out for delivery. Right? Going to the next slide. And this is a bit more detail into the leg one measurement approach. And it's highlighting how the product moves, right? So we got volume that's being collected from routes. We got volume that's being picked up and dropped off at the retail locations. They get commingled, right? So we have packages. We've got volume that's being sampled, and then in addition to that, in leg one, as Mr. During mentioned, we're going to be leveraging seeded mail pieces where it's required based on the response rates in certain geographies. We may not be getting the needed responses that are required to be statistically accurate. In those cases, we will be seeding to ensure that we have enough volume to enable measurement, and volume gets transported from the collection to the post offices on that same LLV, right? And then gets to the post office. They get transported, from the post office to the outgoing plant on that same truck. And we measure it, from acceptance to the first scan at the origin plant and determine if the product is on time in leg 1 or not.
Hello, good morning, Mr. Salim and Mr. Deering. A couple questions on the slide, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Great. So I guess the first big picture item I'd like to ask about is this idea of the mail being transported and processed together. It appears that the major shift here in the leg 1 measurement is going to be the use of parcel scans versus letter and flat scans. And so at the origin plant, are parcels being processed on the same equipment on the same time frame as letter and flat mail? And can you talk about those like actual automated processes and how they're similar and how they're different?
Sure. I'm going to talk to that, right? So first off, it's not a versus situation, right? So we're only using packages to supplement. Right. So I'd like to say that, we have, mail everywhere, right? But we don't, right? When you start going down to the 5-digit level, it becomes, a greater challenge and, cost prohibitive to sit there and think we're going to have the information that enables us to have, tight margins of errors or acceptable margins of errors, I'd offer, with just mail alone. We do know that packages are growing. And we do know that packages, are being entered by customers at their mailbox, which, by the way, I'm going to offer was something that, came up from the PRC way back when we started going forward with the internal measurement is just, and they asked me to keep that into consideration, right? How we would be able to measure from the customer mailbox to the first processing operation. Packages allow us to do that. So there's two, answers to the question that you proposed. Number one, it's not being used to instead of, in lieu of, it's used to complement it, right? And it's used to validate the operational processes. Now, if you can envision a carrier picking up mail at their on the street, whether it's a collection point or whether it's from the customer mailbox, just getting a package to accepting it because it has a label printed on it. So our carriers, they're instructed to scan those barcodes on those packages. And so we now have intelligence of acceptance on that particular mail piece. Now, we also know the device that's scanning that package, right? Just like we know the device that's scanning the CPMS barcodes that are on the collection points, and we know the device that's scanning the mail pieces that are inside those collection boxes that are out there. That device is with that carrier and assigned to that carrier. So when that carrier drives back to their post office, we're under the, operational process that they get back to the post office. It basically gets on that nutty cart, gets staged with that mail and packages all on those same nutty carts in these post offices, and they go on that truck to go back to the plant. And so that's basically the last truck that leaves that particular delivery unit. And that's why we call it a dispatch of value, right? It's the last one. So if that carrier gets back to the post office on time, then we're under the assumption that they're putting it on that transportation and that transportation is going back to the plant. Now we validate that that occurred by monitoring whether it's a seed piece that got sampled or whether it's a, collection sampling that got sampled or a package itself got seen on our operation equipment to hit the network. Now, is it the same operating plan for letters versus flats versus packages? The answer to that is no. But it is based upon shape. So letters, they follow the same process, every single day, right? And flats, they follow the same process, and packages follow the same process. But those processes, based upon the shape, are seen at those mail processing plants because they all ride together. Now, if they are not, then that's going to identify a deficiency in that process and will wind up being an impact on leg 1.
I guess if I could ask for a little more specifics here, in terms of when the first scan at the origin plant occurs, could you talk through how the first scan occurs for letters versus how the first scan occurs for parcels?
So the first scan on a letter could be at a facer canceller, right, or AFCS, or an outgoing primary, depending upon the makeup of the mail, meaning you're not going to see all your flats on a canceller, right? It'll go to an outgoing primary. And packages you're going to see on a parcel sorter, right? So, you know, it basically now, depending upon the parcel sorter, you may have two different sort plans for a parcel sorter, but we're moving towards, you know, efficiencies in our technology that actually allows us to do sorts on the same sort plan, outgoing and secondary, but it's irrelevant because you will see it in that operation. You will see it on a parcel sorter, or if it's a parcel, or you will see it on a flat sorter or a cancellation, depending on how the operational flow works and the size of the particular flat for flats. And you'll see it on a facer canceller or an outgoing primary, depending on how it's handled for the letters.
So I guess one big picture question here is, historically, have you seen the letters that have been sampled in the collection box sampled, and looking at the time from the collection scan to the first acceptance scan? And I assume with your historical data on parcels which have also been receiving acceptance scans by the carriers, and then first origin scans at the automation equipment, do you see any differences across the last few years, across facilities, across districts, in like the first mile delay between letters and parcels and flats and parcels? Or do you see a convergence of data, and have you analyzed whether the parcel first mile delays for a given district for a given week are similar or different than the first mile delays for letters and flats for a given district for a given week?
Oh, the short answer is yes. The long answer is, you know, when you generalize at a national perspective, together. But if you look at it from the individual districts, and I'd offer, you know, with the granularity going down to the plant level, when you start looking at it at the individual plant level, yes, there are differences. And those differences identify where you have operational flow issues that then get rectified by our operational partners. So if you have stuff running in on the same truck, and you see packages being run and you don't see mail run, then there's probably something going on with your basically, you know, what we call the car wash, right? Where they basically separate the product to go on, and that needs to be rectified. If you see cancellations being done and you don't see it on the packages for that same post office, then once again, you got to trace it back to the car wash and understand why it's not you know, it might be a FIFO or a staging issue that's related to the packages. But the beauty of this approach is it combines the two together and not only gives you a better representation of the product flow, but understand where those pain points and log jams are in regards to those operational processes. So the short answer is yes, but if you're looking for generics, it differs depending upon what site and what facility.
In the performance plan and the profile and performance calculation that's outlined in the various PDFs that have been filed in the docket, when you have a leg one measurement for a given district in a given week, the N number that's being calculated at the end of the process that would be reported, would that number include all available data, or will there be a way to separate out the number that is generated for the leg one measurement for a specific district for a specific week, or for a specific 5-digit zip code for a specific week, between data that was generated from a letter process and data that was generated from a parcel process?
I'm going to defer to our statistician, Jordan Gleen, but my understanding would be yes, but I'm going to defer to Jordan for him to answer that.
Hey, Jordan, raise your hand so you can get unmuted.
Can you hear me okay?
We good.
Perfect. John, I'm going to ask you to quickly rephrase the question, just so I want to make sure I'm addressing exactly what you asked. Sorry.
Sure. So, like, you know, in the current environment, with you have a leg one number, the most granular level that we have right now for leg one would be at a given district for a given week. And as I understand the system as it's currently operating, that number is just going to have letter and flat data in it. Under this approach that has both letter data, parcel data, and is going to be at the 5-digit level instead of at the district level, for a given week at the most granular level, at the 5-digit level, will you be able to generate a number for the leg one delay that is based on only the letter data and only the parcel data, or will the only output of this system be a combined leg 1 delay that takes all of the letter information and all of the parcel information to generate that weekly 5-digit number?
So the answer is, and I want to preface this, the answer is in some instances, you're going to be able to do both. And in some instances, it's going to be combined. That is going to depend on the sample volume collected, and that is going to tie back to the strata, which is something that we mentioned in both our design documents and our responses to the CIR filings. But the goal is, yes, for instances where we can, we will produce the result at the letter versus flat. You will be able to separate them.
I guess I'm talking primarily about, the first of all, the strata is more on leg 3 than leg 1. Is there a strata component to leg 1 as well?
So sorry. No. But on leg, sorry, for leg, sorry, I misunderstood the question. I apologize. For leg 1, we are going to do it at a lane level. The design is to get the samples at the zip5 level. Again, if it is possible for us to report based on the quantity of samples we have, we will be able to. But if we cannot, it will be a granularized answer. I'm sorry, I misunderstood the question. I apologize.
It's all good. So when I'm looking at
John,
yep.
Just let me echo that, right? And so now I understand, I think, what you're asking for. As I alluded to, this is going to be supplemental. So if you're looking for both, and we don't need packages, you're never going to see packages. You know what I mean? We got plenty on the mail side, and we don't need to supplement with packages. However, where packages are used, and depending upon its use, meaning if it's incorporated in clustering, which we'll talk about, further on in this presentation, the answer is we should have plenty of data and intelligence around it where it's being used as supplemental.
So one of the specifics here, and I know that there are a lot of PDFs open, so we don't have to get into the PDF by PDF piece here because you guys have put together a very nice presentation, and I don't want to take up all the time on these specifics. One of the specific items, though, was in the leg 1 profile and performance calculation, this idea that in order to do a collection box profile, you need 10 samples. The volume of samples has to be 10 for a specific 5-digit zip code. And if you don't hit that 10 number, then you start going up the chain of clustering, up the hierarchy of clustering, from a 5-digit into maybe a zip3 or into a density cluster or an LPC cluster. And as trying to understand this specific issue, if, for an example, in a given week, you only had 1 or 2 or 3 letter-based samples for that zip5, but there are a lot of parcels out there, and you may have 10 or 20 or 30 parcels in that zip5. Would you be able to generate a zip5 level collection box profile using only or the majority of that data as parcel data for that zip5 for that week? And would that prevent the clustering hierarchy from coming into effect?
So the answer is no. The answer is if you are below the minimum threshold we have for measurement from a sample perspective, it automatically imputes up and it will not only leverage packages to close that. The package data is meant to be supplemental. It is not meant to be. And so in that instance where you're talking about 1 or 2 pieces sampled, it would impute from the higher level, even if you had that number of packages.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you for detailing that.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jordan.
Sorry, one more slide. The caveat there is that on the retail acceptance side, everything is going to be package based, and there will be no certified letters being sampled on the retail side. So on the collection box side, out in the carriers out on the routes, it's going to be letters first and then parcels to supplement. But then on the retail side, it's going to be parcels only. Do I have that correct?
So I'm going to offer that that's probably not an accurate representation, right? So, and the reason I say that, John, is yes, parcels will be used to supplement, but, virtually every post office has a CPMS, or I'm sorry, a collection point associated, whether it's a lobby chute or a box out front, right? Which, helps us understand whether we're picking that volume up, meaning they have to scan that puppy, and also allows us to do our sampling methodology accordingly. And that's where it aligns with, the parcel volume as a supplement as necessary. And on the retail profile, I do believe it's not even supplementation, right? I do believe we combine that together for our retail profile, but I'll defer to Jordan on that combination piece. But just keep in mind, John, that there are collection points in these post offices, right? It's not just the packages that show the profiles.
Sure.
Go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's a leg one profile, but remember for the CPMS, we have a CPMS profile that we're using for the collection boxes, and that is what we're using to measure that. There's a separate retail profile, which then gets combined with the CPMS profile to aggregate into our leg one profile.
Okay, but thank you.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Mr. Deering. And just to discuss, right, usage of package data, right? Package data is, more robust. It is consistent and it is representative, to look at the flow of volume from collection to post office to the origin plant. And, our approach, right, reflects the shift in product trend lines, right? Volume is growing in packages, and mail volume is declining. And just to throw some stats around, right? So 39% of more post offices receive retail packages than certified mail. Think about that, 39% more, right? So on average per week. And 63%, and again, as Mr. Deering mentioned in the opening, one of the things that, we've been asked is, hey, will Postal Service ever be able to measure from the customer's mailbox, right? And our response to that is, hey, right now with this new approach, 63% of 5-digit zip codes have packages that are accepted on the route, as compared to 0%, right, nil on the certified mail. So what this utilization of a growing product trend line would enable us to do is measure and provide insights into experience from the customer's mailbox to the post office, which, as I mentioned, is not represented in the current state. So, these are just stats, right? 39% more post offices receive retail packages, and 63% of the 5-digit zip codes have package accepted on their route, compared to 0% for certified mail. Okay. Now I'll turn over to Jordan Goulian, who's going to go over the leg one clustering methodology.
So, hi everyone. I'm going to give a quick overview of the clustering methodology. So before we start getting into the specifics, we have replaced the district level sampling approach in this new approach with a cluster sampling approach, which is primarily based off of geographic regions and postal operations. So we're breaking those down into these overarching clusters that are at the highest level or at the RPDCs, with the cancellation letter facilities underneath that, and then there are these volume density clusters underneath that. So you have 3 layers of clustering. The samples are actually prompted from a bottoms-up approach at the 5-digit zip code level, and then those results are aggregated into the cluster methodology. We do have an explanation of some of this on slide 11, so we can walk through it, but at a high level, the RPDC service area cluster, the letter cancellation clusters, and the subclusters will all be giving us 95% confidence intervals for sampling results with margins of error at 1% or below 1%, which is consistent, which is very close to what we're doing today. Going through the sampling rules, again, the sampling prompts will be generated at collection points at the 5-digit zip code level. the geographies with lower sampling compliance will be prompted for additional sampling so we can try to remedy those issues with oversampling, with additional samples collected. And then you're going to have seeded mail pieces at 5-digit zip codes with low sampling compliance or low volume. So we're also using supplemental packages. The packages accepted on the route will be used to supplement the CPMS profile. And lastly, you're going to have service performance measurement, which is the completed samples will form a sample base for the MOE calculation, and geographies with MOEs that are in excess of 5% will have the MOE imputed from a higher level based off of the hierarchy mentioned above. Are there questions on this slide, or can we move to?
Yeah, I have a few questions on this slide.
Sure.
So I guess the first major question here is about the distribution of samples within a district or within a 5-digit zip code. Can you talk generally about how this approach changes that distribution among geographies as compared to the current approach?
So I'm going to answer this at a high level to see if that answers your question. And if you have additional questions, I'll fall into those. So we're using a proportional volume. We're using a proportional sample prompt, which is based off of relative volume within the zip5 that each collection box holds. So if collection box 1 holds 10% of, if there are 10 collection boxes, they each hold 10% of the volume, you'll prompt it based off of that. Everyone has a 10% likelihood of being pulled. If the volume is, let's again say we have those 10, but one of those collection boxes is responsible for 50%, that one will have a 50% likelihood of being pulled, of being sampled, as opposed to the other ones, which will have lower sample promptings. But it's based off of proportional and relative volume. Does that,
Jordan,
at the 5-digit level?
Hey, Jordan, sorry. I don't think that's the question he's asking, right? And you know, John, let me see if I understood your question. I think you were saying basically, you know, what does this mean to the sampling targets? And I would offer that this is probably, well, not probably, this is fundamentally the design principle change of our service performance measurement system. So as you're well aware, you know, with the current system, you know, the targets are basically to meet our statistical validity based upon the district, meaning we can cast across the district, and if we're able to get it, you know, representative of that particular district, it's all good, right? This now changes from that top-down approach in sampling to a bottom-up approach in sampling, where you can now make your targets at the 5-digit, and it all aggregates up to the next level, like the next level being a 3-digit geography, and then up to the district geography. So that was a question that was actually presented by the PRC along our journey is, hey, can you do measurement down to the 5-digit level? And if not, can you do it to the 3-digit level? And that's where it became extremely cost prohibitive because of the architecture of how we were doing things at the district level and the casting down. So we looked at it and said, okay, how can we do this 5-digit? And you know, if we're going to do this and going to do it right and be able to aggregate things so it's representative, we need to re-architect it to be sampling methodology at the 5-digit target level, and then everything rolls up. And I guess what I'm trying to say there, John, is even if you are not, you don't have the statistical volume at a 5-digit level to be able to, you know, have accurate measurement, or you have really high margins of errors, those samples will roll up to the 3-digit, even though it's not going to, you're not able to do statistical accuracy because let's say, you know, your margin of error is 50%, I'm making it up, right? But those same samples will roll up to the 3-digit, even though you can't use it at the 5 because it's statistically invalid. Does that make sense? And I think that answers your question.
It makes sense. It's getting to part of the question. If I could rephrase a little bit, the proportionality of the sample, the bias of the sample, and where it's going to select the sample to be chosen. In the current environment, because it's a district level sample, you're choosing the highest level collection points within that entire district. And the same basic logic applies in the proposed system or the new system. except that it's now starting at the 5-digit level. So it cannot simply, in the current environment, when you look at the information you all provided in the various, all the different requests, you see that there are a few 5-digit zip codes within a district that represent the majority of the existing leg 1 samples. And so that approach will not work under this methodology because that will not capture enough 5-digit zip codes. So the same concept will apply at the 5-digit level, where the highest volume collection boxes from the density sample will be applied in choosing those targets, but it's now going to be for each 5-digit. And so what I'm really curious about is how you go from getting hundreds or maybe even 1,000 samples in one 5-digit zip code in a district in the current environment to spreading that same number of samples across a much larger set of 5 digits.
Okay, so let me address that. So you're asking about sample representation and its predictability within the elements within that district. Am I correct? That's
a big part. Yeah, that's what I would like to know more about.
So again, this bottoms up approach is designed to be more representative of all of the zip 5s within that district, as opposed to really just focusing on the highest volume one. So it's going to give you a more vast representation of what's there, because you're going to get prompting at more 5-digit zip codes and more collection boxes and more layers of that data. So you're going to get better geographic representation that way. When it is rolled up, it is not rolled up based off of this, not only just based off of the sample volume, it is also rolled up. There are factors in there as far as what the relative volume is. So you don't correct one bias by creating a bias the other direction. So that is, again, that I think that addresses the overarching question you're answering. If you have more specifics you want me to get into, please let me know.
Well, I mean, there's a very big implementation question here, which is when I look at the list of 5 digits by districts, there are going to be a lot of 5 digits that need to have sampling under this system that historically do not appear to have gotten much but leg 1 sampling. Have you gone through a process to identify how you're going to successfully implement a much wider spread of sampling?
Yes. So what we did was we looked at what the volume densities were for the collection boxes, what the weekly volume densities were, what the ability was to sample. There are going to be some of those collection boxes and some zip 5s. Think about places with really low volume where you may need to use seeded pieces. But yes, we have reviewed that. We have looked at what the underlying data is, how it rolls up, and whether or not we can do it. Also, because we're doing the scans at the collection points, we know we can actually look at data to see where the volume's coming in, how it's flowing back to the facilities to inform that.
That's helpful. Thank you. The other piece of the clustering design, can you talk about how the clusters work for RTO versus non-RTO areas?
Sure. So again, the clusters are at the highest level. They are based off of, geographic regions within there. Now, and the reason I think you're talking about the RTO versus non-RTO is because they have different service standards for leg 1. Is that the crux of what you want to drive it?
And theoretically, they should have different transportation as well, so that this time between when acceptance and cancellation should be different. So
again, the clusters, when you get down to the density cluster level, the lowest level under the cancellation facilities, it does take into account RTO versus non-RTO. Again, in some cases, there is going to be a density cluster that includes both RTO and non-RTO facilities. And in that case, we will weight. There is a weighting in the profile to allow for the adjusted metric for that region. But in general, the goal was to, when possible, try to keep the RTOs together and keep the non-RTOs together. Again, that's not 100%
Right.
possible.
And just to add on to Jordan, what you were
Yeah.
mentioning, and JP, essentially we're going down to the zip 5 level, right? So in those situations, you got RTO and non-RTO, which is essentially, for the most part, it is at the zip 5 level, right? Entire post office for the most part, but we're going down to the zip 5 level, so it kind of negates the fact that you need to have separate profiles, right? So we're measuring it at the zip 5 level, right? So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but I just wanted to point that out.
So,
is that
yeah, so Arson, let me take a stab at this as well, right? So, the short answer, John, is that they're going to be intertwined in certain scenarios, right? And in a lot of scenarios, they're going to be distinct. But you're actually talking about the profile that gets generated of, how you determine leg 1. And that basically is in the calculations, right? So in essence, a standard is a standard, but your expectation in your calculation for leg 1 is, did it get to your first processing operation in time? So if you're in a non-RTO office, your expectation is going to be different than a non-RTO office, if you understand what I'm saying. And so you're measuring against that calculation for, on time in leg 1, right? And that's actually built into the methodology. So I would offer that the clustering is really, I won't say it's irrelevant, but I would say that it is using it from a like office perspective, and Jordan can, I think he already did explain that. But the calculation piece is distinct at each individual 5-digit, and that's binary. Either a 5-digit is RTO or non-RTO.
So again, if for a specific 5-digit, if there's not enough sample volume for a given week for leg 1, then the clustering approach will have to be used to develop what is functionally a proxy. And if the first layer of clustering is hit, and for example, a 5-digit zip code and it with RTO 1-day delay transportation, if there's sufficient samples in the density cluster, then you'll use the density cluster to proxy for the leg 1 delay for that 5-digit zip code. But if there's not enough sample volume in the smallest level, the lowest level hierarchy of cluster, you have to start moving up. And eventually you can hit a level of hierarchy where the data that's being used is a very different form of transportation. You'd be using at the RPDC cluster level, you would be using a lot of 5-digit data for places that do not have RTO transportation in effect to proxy for the leg 1 delay for that specific 5-digit that is in an RTO area. And I want to understand how that interaction works better.
So John, what I'll say is this. When we go through this, we have an example on slide 11 where we can go through this, where it actually shows the aggregation, the roll-up. I think that will address some of your concerns, but to answer it at the most granular level, yes, there's always a possibility that something could happen that would cause there to be that you wouldn't meet your sample targets at the volume density cluster level. Now, the way this is designed, that should not be an issue for most of these regions ever, but we can't say with 100% certainty that something couldn't happen that would cause that to potentially occur. But that is not the way it is designed, and it is designed so that in the overwhelming majority of cases, if it is not being reported at the zip 5, that the volume density cluster, the lowest level cluster, will be able to supplement and support.
If everything works perfectly in implementation, the cluster design will not be very relevant for the calculation. It is only when the implementation of the sampling collection does not, basically the sample requests do not turn into actual sample volume that this comes into play.
In general, yes.
Yeah, and John, I'm going to offer that, this methodology actually gives you better representation than the current methodology, right? I'm just saying it actually goes to a greater level of granularity at the 5-digit and allows you to get a better representation of that collection to first processing operation, which, as you clearly pointed out, is one of those challenges from going from the top-down district approach.
I have a hard time understanding from the responses whether this sampling request approach has been tested, whether it's been tested nationally or for a specific district or anything like that.
So we did a pilot within 2 of the RPDC regions before we went forward with the approach to make sure that we would be getting critical sample volumes to do the measurement approach. So we did do that. It was performed. I'd have to check the record on the dates. I can tell you that the 2 regions it was performed on were Chicago and Omaha. And the results showed that the approach was gathering enough samples for it to move forward, which is why we were comfortable moving forward.
Thank you. That's helpful. That answers my questions on this slide.
Okay, we move to the next slide. Okay,
Go ahead,
so now we're going to talk about statistical significance. As I mentioned before, this is an MOE driven approach. If your MOE is out of line, we're going to impute from the level up. So the margin of error and confidence intervals are derived based on business rules and statistical formulas to balance the business needs and generally accepted statistical principles. So the first thing is we have inputs for statistical significance, which are, one, we have our leg 1 sample size, which uses the proportioned size formula based on, we're using a quasi-census approach for CPMS that we're validating using samples. So the big difference in this approach is we're going from a seeded sample approach to an approach where we're using samples to validate daily scans and collections that we're getting at the collection points. 2, as we included in our submission to PRC number 7, the MOE is derived using the sample size formula. The MOE formula uses a 95% confidence interval for instances where there's fewer than 17,500 measurable samples and 99% when it's above that. And the methodology is required to provide results with a 95% confidence interval and an MOE less than 5%. When that is not met, it is imputed from the level up. In many cases, our confidence intervals will be at the 99% confidence interval with an MOE that is less than 1%. So that you're going to get instances of that on the district quarter levels, which is, I believe, an improvement for the CI from current state. Lastly, we're going to talk about the business rules. Again, sampling is prompted using a bottoms-up approach, as we mentioned before, where it is outlined at the 5-digit zip code level. Results are then aggregated into the higher levels. And again, by using cluster sampling, if we have instances where a zip 5 does not meet its sampling criteria for reporting, we can impute from the higher levels. And again, in a cluster sampling approach, the cluster is predictive of the underlying elements within. That's why it's designed the way they are, and that's why they're powerful, and it allows us to actually drive lower MOEs. It does provide fewer samples than the current approach, and we, again, do use the retail package data, the on-route package data, and the CPMS data from the collection points, which allows us to use a higher p-score in the sample size calculation. So I'm going to stop there if there are questions. If not, we can move to the next slide.
I don't have any questions on this slide.
Perfect. Okay. Okay, so this is, again, this is an example roll-up. I want to be very clear on the front end. This is an example. It is not representative of all zip 5s. This is just to show you how the process works. So the first table is a weekly measurement. So again, in this case, we have a 5-digit zip code that got 13 samples. Based on our calculation, that gave us a 5% MOE with a 95% confidence interval. When we looked at the 3-digit it was a part of, There were 112 total samples, which lowered the MOE to 2%. The district, there were 650, it was 1% MOE with a 95% confidence interval. And then again, we've got in the right three columns, we've got the actual cluster. So we've got our volume density cluster, which had 264 samples, which was a 95% confidence interval, 2% MOE. Then you have the cancellation facility cluster, which was at 474, 95% with a 1% roll up. And then at the RPDC level, again, you're at a 95% confidence interval with a 1% roll up. I wanted to walk through the weekly one because that is the lowest level of granularity for time. I'm going to skip the monthly one in the presence of just being concise, and I will go to the quarterly. As we can see at the quarterly level for this sample 5-digit zip code, we got 169 samples for the quarter, which gave us a 2% margin of error on a 95% confidence interval. And I'm going to, again, you can see that these, in this case, all of the levels are at a 95% confidence interval for the higher ups. And with the exception of the 3-digit zip code level, all of the MOEs are less than 1%. Again, we rounded these to whole numbers just to be for conversational
Jordan, I
purposes.
think you meant the 5-digit, not 3-digit.
Yeah. Well, yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So for example, in this first row of the table, this is the example for a specific week. If for whatever reason in the 5-digit zip code, the sample requests are sent out, but the carrier doesn't respond, there's a technology issue, there's no mail there for them to sample, that number becomes 0, for example.
Sure.
And when you go up to the 3-digit zip code, when I read this table across, it basically is assuming that for every single 5-digit, you've hit your sample targets for that week for that 5-digit. And so, if there's a missing number on the left, that would cascade across all the way to the right. And the big question I have from a clustering perspective, if one 5-digit does not record does not get usable sample data for a given week, that does not automatically mean that another 5-digit will get additional data in the absence of that missing data in the specific 5-digit.
Sure.
Do I have that correct?
You have that correct, but I want to elaborate on my response a little bit. Yes, what you said is correct. However, it's also important for us to recognize that these sample and MOE levels do have, especially at the cluster levels, do have a level of, that they are at a higher level of statistical significance. So if there are missing samples, we would still be highly likely to reach our statistical measures. So again, yes, there is a chance that you might have a zip 5 that doesn't collect any samples and that would cascade up. But
Jordan,
yeah.
Hold on. I think this is where the significance of packages steps in, right? So, I mean, JP, you bring up a valid point. If there's not volume there or whatever to sample at a collection point, very rarely, I mean very rarely, do we not have a package in that 5-digit zip code. So it's the value of packages.
Yeah, in the earlier conversation, we talked about how if the package can be used to supplement, it can't be used to create. And this is where I'm finding that very hard to understand, is if you don't have enough samples, then the package data doesn't get used. But if you have enough samples, then the package data can be used to supplement. It seems like it creates a bifurcation where the problem is still the problem on the low end, but then there's a lot of data on the top end. So as you move across here, it's like at the RPDC cluster level, sure, the 1 5-digit zip code is missing data, but you got enough data from the other 5 digits, and now you have all this package data to supplement because you've hit your minimum threshold number for the calculation. Is that kind of how that bifurcates?
So JP, I think you're misunderstanding the bifurcation, and I want to clarify if I may. What we're saying is if a zip 5, okay, so the most granular level, a zip 5 does not reach its statistical measure where it is significant and we're not able to use the package data to supplement that zip 5. it is only on that zip 5. Again, instead of using 0 samples, let's use 3. So instead of 13, it got 3. It's not enough to do the statistical measure at that level. Those samples will roll up, as will the package data from that zip 5. We're just not going to overwrite the CPMS profile using only package data in that case, because the sample itself there's not a present sample to report on. So you're not going to supplement something that is not able to be reported on. So again, I just wanted to clarify that.
That's helpful. I think that Manon Boudreau, the PR, had raised her hand. Let me see if she is in the meeting and allowed to be admitted. Great. There's Manon.
Hi, good morning. Sorry to interrupt here. It's not very exciting. We keep, at least on my end, I'm in the building of PRC. JP asks a question, we keep getting dropped. So I don't know what the best way is to let you know that we just disappeared, or can you repeat what you just said? So maybe it's a Lauren question. If we're having technical difficulties, how she'd like us to let her know.
I'm not experiencing it on my end, just FYI. So it has to be at the PRC building, because I'm not experiencing that.
So
Okay,
so what's
Manon, I think that Tim's jumped on screen.
what's
Hi,
that?
this is Tim Boone, OGC. If you're having problems, Manon, I would message me through Teams and I'll try to work with you on that. I'm not quite sure what's going on, but.
Okay. Yeah, it probably happened about 4 times, and it's like just when it starts get exciting, we're gone. Anyway, so I'll just keep joining if I get dropped again. And I guess you see when I'm being dropped, because it keeps asking me to be let back in.
Yeah, I've noticed. I've had to readmit you several times. So if you want to ask a question or anything and you're having trouble doing it, let me know. And if you keep getting dropped, and I'll also refer this to our IT people and see if they can reach out to you about it.
Okay. You don't have to repeat what you just said, but I missed it. But thank you.
All right. Thank you, Manon. On this, back to the statistical significance issue.
Sure.
Can you talk about this idea? In other places where the Postal Service uses clustering for the sampling, and I'm thinking specifically here of the IOCS cluster sample approach. The clustering is used to identify places to be sampled instead of other places. So in the IOCS approach, broadly speaking, and I can't, it's not, I don't know how familiar you are with that, but basically the clustering is used to say, instead of trying to sample a bunch of different facilities all across the nation in one day, we will sample the same facility in multiple different ways to be more efficient. And this use of the word cluster and sampling seems to me to be very different than that use of the word clustering and sampling.
It is. So there are different, just to be very high level here for everyone's sake, there are different ways that you can design a clustering sample. So what you're referencing in IOCS, did I get the acronym correct? Is it IOCS? Okay. What they're doing is they're creating what's called a benchmark that is representative. So they're taking an element that is representative of a bunch of other elements. They're saying we have whatever data points, and they're doing it that way. That is one form of a cluster sampling approach. There are other methodologies that you can use, like this one, where what you do is you create, our clusters are based off of geography. Their clusters seem to be based off of something else. And again, the approaches are different, and they use different roll-ups, but that is just for simplicity. Yes, we are using different forms of cluster sampling, and again, yeah, that's really all I can say there.
Okay,
they're different approaches.
My final question on this slide, the confidence interval and the margin of error calculations don't appear to me to be relative to the volume in a given 5-digit or RPDC cluster or district or anything like that. Can you talk about why or how overall volume is comes into play here?
Okay, so I'm going to answer that I'm going to answer it in two parts. So one, it did go into the initial justification for how we designed the MOE intervals. So we did look at volume and other elements of that feature. But at a more granular level, no, we're not running on a weekly level a volume-based approach, and that is based off of business rules within how we need to run this. Again, that would lead to a lot of variability. Again, you're calling for samples in advance, so we're using more conservative metrics as far as what the volume is to allow for that as far as the approach goes. If we were using volume, it would lower the sample targets for some regions at times, but we don't know what the volume is going to be in a given week. There's no way to predict it perfectly out into the future, so we used a wider net as far as that goes. So
okay, thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
So we can move to the next slide. Okay, this is again. So now we're going to talk about seeding very briefly. So seeding is being performed to supplement low volume at collection boxes and/or 5-digit zip codes with low sampling compliance. Just so we're clear, from a definitional perspective, sampling compliance is how often you are completing your sample. So if we prompt you for 10 samples and you complete 10, you would have an 100% sample compliance. If we prompt you for 10 samples and you complete 5, it would be 50%, just to elaborate on that. So again, there's a sample performance evaluation, which is if you have 5-digit zip codes with low sample compliance, we'll evaluate first to determine if sampling shortfalls can be remedied with additional sample prompts. So this is going to be a more likely solution for your highest volume 5-digit zip codes, but it's not exclusive to them. And then 5-digit zip codes with a sample variance to target of greater than 25%, they will be selected for seeding at collection boxes with low compliance. So at that point, once you reach this 25% shortfall, it is unlikely that you're going to be able to make it up in future weeks. So we're going to seed to ensure that we reach our critical target. The seeding determination, so collection boxes will be seeded. Yeah, again, we're talking about the methodologies. So collection boxes that have multiple instances where a sample is not obtained and we need to perform seeding, we need to perform sampling at those sites. Those are going to be those are going to be candidates for seeding. And then again, if it's a 5-digit zip code containing the collection boxes with a sampling deficit that cannot be remedied, we're going to select boxes for seeding. Okay, so that's that.
Great. I will save my seeding questions for the next slide.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay. All right. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Jordan. So just to provide an overview of seeding process, right? As Jordan mentioned on the prior slide, there's going to be a process, right, that will identify the list of collection boxes that require seeding based on the analysis, being done as described on the criteria on the prior slide. And the service performance measurement team, which is my team, will be coordinating with our internal auditing team, from the Chief Performance Office group. They serve as internal auditors, and we and on this slide we're calling them the seeding team. We'll be providing them a list of collection boxes along with the specific time frame where each box needs to be seeded. And those seed mail pieces are pre-printed. They will have unique barcodes on and are shipped to control locations as a staging point throughout the country. The seeding team will collect those mail pieces from those locations. And for now, they will record the barcode of the pre-printed mail piece along with the timestamp of when the piece was dropped in the selected collection box that was identified as requiring seed mail pieces, right? And in parallel, we're also working on developing a mobile application to automate this whole process, which is estimated to be made available in Q2 of FY26. The mobile application will inform the droppers, right, on their devices, which collection box that requires seeding, and then they will utilize the application to record, right? Meaning they would be able to scan the mail piece, which will record the barcode, and then also record the timestamp and the collection box where the mail piece was dropped at. The addition of mobile application will provide additional validation points, to making sure like it gets dropped at the right location. Mistakes are made, right? And then we want to make sure that we're able to perform additional validations just to make sure that we don't include any pieces that may have been mistakenly dropped, or wrong pieces get dropped in the blue boxes. So those get removed from the measurement. Again, just to make sure like we're able to validate and remove any mistakes that may have taken place while employees are out dropping seed mail pieces in those selected collection boxes.
Do you expect the seeding to go live when this is implemented, or is it going to be a process that expands as the implementation of this new approach is performed?
Expectation is that seeding will go live come September of this year, so beginning of September 2025. And
the short answer is JP is day one. We anticipate seeding will go into effect. Obviously, we'll have to analyze data, but my expectation is that it goes into effect on day one.
How much do you expect to seed on day one?
How do you answer an unknown quantity, right? Depends upon the new methodology and how well they effectively hit their targets, right? And then we analyze that data to determine the seeds that are needed. So it's kind of chicken and egg. I don't know at this point. I know I ordered a boatload of pieces. Let's just put it that way. We ordered a sufficient quantity of pieces to be ready.
A lot of the seeding from looking at the 5-digit zip codes and the targets that were provided under seal, and I won't talk about the targets that were provided under seal, may be further from mail processing facilities than, the post office in front of the mail processing facility is generally going to have a lot of volume in it. How could you talk through how that works as you get further and further and further from the place where the seeded pieces will be kept?
Again, like I mentioned, we have over 100 different locations. I can't name those where those seed mail pieces will be staged, but it's over 100 different locations where seed mail pieces will be staged throughout the country. So that way, the seeding team will be able to go to the closest location that's available, wherever the seeding is required, and then they'll be able to retrieve those seed mail pieces and be able to drop at those selected collection points.
Oh, I guess the best way to put this, JP, is that what you would like to be called, JP?
JP is generally what I go by, yes.
All right. So I guess the best way to describe this is, the CPO, right? The Chief Performance Officer has skin in this game. They're, like Arslan alluded to, is our internal auditor. So they're going to help drive the compliance of the actually sample targets, right? Because that's in their best interest, right? You do your job and it works well. If not, they're also responsible for driving out to those reaches and dropping those seeded pieces. So that's why they have skin in the game, right? They drive the compliance. They manage their workload. They don't, then their workload increases. So it's actually a check and balance that I think works to the organization's benefit in getting a more representative approach to it.
Great, that's very helpful. Thank you. I don't have any more questions on this slide.
All right, good. Good.
Actually, I'm sorry though, but before we can go to leg 3, I do have a couple of questions on leg 1 from the most recent CIR responses that haven't quite been covered yet today, or I kind of want to circle back to. Is that okay to do now, or would you prefer to go to leg 3 and circle back at the
On
end?
leg 1, I think it's relevant.
Do you happen to have the CIR response filed on Friday, or Thursday, sorry, the response to CIR number 7 in front of you?
I do.
Specifically, I'd like to know more about the response to question 6.
While we're opening that up, can you start stating what your question is, JP?
Sure. So it talks about the CPMS profile and the calculation of the CPMS profile. And in requirements 5.4.2 to 5.4.5 of the profile and performance calculation design, it talks document talks about how dispatch days in leg 1 will be compared against package and sampling data when available. And then the response specifically states leg 1 performance for packages picked up on a route, if available, replaces the estimated performance of mail density picked up by the same carrier. And I'm trying to better understand how package data can replace letter or flat data and how that will be used in the overall hierarchy of the system. And I'm having a hard time understanding this response in conjunction with our earlier discussion. And what I think this is saying, because there are, 3 components to the leg 1 profile. There's the collection box samples, there's the retail profile samples, and there's the CPMS component. I think what this is saying is that the CPMS component can be augmented by package scans where available. But I may be misreading that.
And this is where I'm going to ask Jordan to also chime in, but let me give a high-level response, and then Jordan can provide anything that requires more detail. But essentially, what the question was that, hey, in the CPMS profile, and JP, that was specifically regarding CPMS profile, and as we indicated on a number of slides here, is that where needed, we will be utilizing the volume, packet volume that is collected, on the route to supplement the data where we may not have enough, collection volume, right? Meaning letters and flats being collected from the blue boxes, right? And the data that we collect on the packages, if that is utilized and if that's available, it serves as a auditing mechanism, right? So volume is collected by the device, by the carrier, right? They scan the collection box, and then there may be some sample pieces, being collected from those blue boxes or collection boxes. And then they may also, scan a package that they collect, right, on their route. All of that, density comes back to the post office, and then it gets, transported to the plant. And then what we look for is, okay, if there were any sample pieces, or if there were any, packages that may have been collected by that device that did the or the carrier, were any of those products scanned at the plant, where it allows us to measure the performance from the collection to the post office, and then from the post office to the origin processing facility. And essentially that's what the leg 1 measurement is, right? It's a measurement of the first leg, right? So, and Jordan, you want to add any additional details to that question?
And that was a good response, Arslan, but let me try to put it not in as complicated terms, right? So if you have a carrier picking up packages on their route and they're scanning those same CPMS barcodes, right? And you get it back to the processing facility and you see that package on automation equipment, that means that truck actually made it back to that plant. Right. So that's the key behind this, JP, is that, there's no, magic of that volume getting into the plant separately. Right. If the carrier scans the package with the device, scans the CPMS barcode with that same device, that made it back to the truck, that truck went back to the plant, then that is on time in leg one. It got to the plant. Now, if the package is seen, right, and there's something that happens in leg two because it made it to the plant on time, that's going to flush out in leg two in the overall service performance scores. Meaning, if it doesn't become on time, that's gonna be readily apparent. Like if they, like whatever happens, they stall it or delay it or whatever, and it winds up being an impact from that perspective of leg one going to the final destination. But from a leg one perspective, it made it back on time. Does that make sense?
It does, but I'm still struggling to understand in the current structure of the leg one profile, the CPMS component is essentially, did the carrier scan the blue box before the collection, after the last posted pickup time, and and then from there, as long as that carrier scan existed at the blue box, then for the CPMS component of the leg one measurement, that is 100% on time.
Oh.
If that scan did not occur correctly, then there's some adjustment.
No, that is not accurate. If they scan that CPMS barcode and they scan that package and they go back to the post office prior to that dispatch of value, then it will be considered on time. That's the key piece here. That's what's missing here. The carrier has to get back to meet the dispatch. If they don't, there's no way it made it back on time.
The distinction of this new content is that if there is a package scanned by the carrier that's doing the blue box collections, now you have a measurement of whether that package that's associated with that volume that may not have any scans because that's not part of the CPMS part of the profile. Now that package can be scanned at the first leg of processing to provide an additional check to see whether you can infer that volume made it back in time, made it up the stream in the time it was supposed to.
Mm-hmm. That's correct.
But from the response in the CIR, it is not that that leg one, it's not that the CPMS piece, if there are letter scans from the collection box sampling, that is different than the package sampling, the package scans that are being used in the CPMS part of the profile. Those are two different boxes that both feed into leg one.
I'm not following the question.
Can you either reword or
Sure.
rephrase it?
When you go into the leg one profile, there's on page 2, there are 5 boxes for the leg one profile. The leg one profile terminates in the bottom right-hand corner. Things that feed into that are the collection box sampling profile and the CPMS profile, which are combined into the collection box profile. And then there's also the retail profile that is combined with the collection box profile to get to the overall leg one profile. Within the CPMS profile, right now in the existing system for the CPMS profile, there is no package data being used for the CPMS profile. And so right now it is the carrier scans on the route of the blue boxes. Did they occur on time or not? And then that's compared to the density for those blue boxes to identify what % of the daily pickup volume is determined as on time for the collection box profile and thus the leg one profile. The documentation here, this 5.2.4, 5.4.2 for the CPMS profile, you will now use package data along with those blue box scans to now link the package scan of a route that was doing blue box pickups to whether that piece made it, from the carrier's handheld item, did that carrier make it back before transportation occurred? And then for the package scans, did that package get an origin scan on time? So now you're going to augment the CPMS profile with additional data that is package based.
JP, I think there's confusion, right? So you're confusing the current approach, which essentially has 3 profiles in leg one, right? So you got the sampling profile, right? you got the collection box profile, and then you got the retail profile. And the new approach in the documentations that we submitted, it has two profiles, right? One is retail, which is cut and dry, right? And then the other is CPMS, which is essentially the combination of the CPMS scans, the sample scans, the seed meal pieces, and then the packages all combined together to generate the CPMS profile. And I'll ask Niket Fatak, who's my technical SME on it, to also chime in. Niket, if you would like to raise your hand if you want to add any additional details around that. JP, what I stated, does that make sense?
Yep. Yeah, it just got enabled. Yeah, so that's, I think, the confusion, JP. I think you're conflating the current state system, which has two different concepts of a collection profile and a collection box profile. In the future state 5-digit measurement, we're calling it a combined CPMS profile that combines all the intelligence that we walked through in the leg 1 slide, which is the boxes being scanned, intelligence on packages being collected on the route, the carrier returning to the post office on time, and then supplementing with randomized sampling and the seeding. All that is part of the CPMS profile. So when you mentioned replacing the package data captured on route will not replace MailP samples, that's not what it's saying. It's saying that the package data collected on route is intelligence that will be used to measure leg 1. So maybe the term replace.
I think you said that in reverse. Basically, you're going to have CPMS, which was predominantly driven by samples, right, and seeding, and supplemented by packages.
Right.
So the specific question here in the leg 1 profile and performance calculation 5.4.3.1 says if the density record has a package or sampling days in leg 1, then the total CPMS density will be the pickup days in leg 1 plus the lower of the package or sampling days in leg 1. And so the way that I read that, the lower of means that if there is a result from the package scans between acceptance and actual processing that's lower than the same result of acceptance and processing for a letter or flat-based scan, then the calculation for that 5-digit zip code, or as it gets rolled up, even a district, would be based on package data instead of letter data, even though both exist within the system. That is what I'm having a hard time understanding.
Jordan?
Sorry, I wasn't sure if that was directed at me or at Niket. So JP, I'm gonna read your question back to you in brief so that I can make sure that we're doing this. What you are concerned about, again, I'm going to rephrase it for simplicity, but what you're concerned about is the use of the word replace and how we're using the word replace when it comes to the CPMS profile with the usage of either samples and or packages. And you're saying that in the actual design document, it says the lower of, and then it lists both samples and packages. Is that correct? That's what you want me to address?
That is like what I would want to, that's what I would like to understand better, yes.
Okay, so again, it is that reference is about the replacement of the collection box data with actual measurable data, because again, the CPMS data is it's well measured data, but it doesn't have 100% of it doesn't have the timestamp the same way that the sample would or the way that the package would. So what we're doing is we're taking vaguer data and we're replacing it with better data. So that's the justification for why we can make that replacement. As far as the lower of, I think that is, and again, I will speak to that. I think that is a misread of, it is trying to say the lower of either. So if our CPMS data is approximate and proxied based off of what we have from collection data, we can replace it with the real data that we have from the sample and or a package so that it's more accurate and more reflective. So that is the justification for it.
Yeah, so JP, I you know, the fact that you're bringing this up, right, will make me go back and ask the team to revisit that. But, you know, from my perspective, if we have a mail sample, that mail sample should set the precedent. And let me rephrase. If we have a mail sample and a package sample, the mail sample should roll the day because we're measuring market dominant product and it's mail. And if that's not clear in our design, we'll revise that so it is clear, because that's the intent.
That's very helpful. And I think maybe some of this confusion is the word lower in 5.4.3.1 is vague. And I don't know whether lower means if the samples on the route say they were 100% on time, the samples of market dominant mail letters were 100% on time, and there were a bunch of parcels, and for whatever reason, the parcels were only 95% on time. If the lower says you're going to use the 95% on time from parcels instead of the 100% on time from market dominant mail, I mean, you can make an argument either way on that, but okay. I mean, you understand where I'm coming from.
I do understand. We'll clarify that in the business rules, and make sure that that's clear.
Okay. I think I had one other question on leg 1. Let me be quick. Okay, it's about the transportation dispatch times.
What question is that, George? JP?
It's question number 5. It talks about the transportation optimization planning and scheduling system. And it says, Part D says the dispatch time data is manually managed in the top system and accessed by SPM. And it talks about actual trip departures when available. That's subpart E. It says transportation dispatch time and intelligence from actual trip departures when available is most appropriate. And I was hoping that you could talk about how the TOPS system works. I'm not very familiar with that system, and how often actual trip departure time is used, especially as we get into the new RTO routes and, you know, these unique departure and arrival times at the RTO routing of multiple post offices being hit on the same transportation schedule, whether that's something that's really being collected in TOPS or whether that's not something that you would expect the post offices to report on a daily basis with actual data.
Oh, you know, I'll cover the high level of this and then I'll ask the team to weigh in, right? So TOPS, right, and, you know, the acronym you already stated, is basically our transportation scheduling system, right? So that's going to list the times of the trips that are going out to these post offices and other facilities. And those times are going to be utilized to understand and recognize, you know, the schedules that are associated with those trips. Actuals are the mechanics of either leveraging the GPS that's associated with those trips. You know, we have a platform, right? A transportation platform, and we have devices, whether they're PBS devices and scanners, or we're using the GPS that comes from our transportation system, and then the scan activities that are performed out there to say, hey, I got my truck, right? Or the truck arrived by breaking a geofence. That's when we say when. Now, I'd like to say we're 100% scan compliance everywhere all the time. That's just not, you know, a reasonable, you know, assumption. So we leverage it where we have it possible, but there are technology things that happen, right? Transmittal things of that nature. And if that happens, then we're going to go upon the dispatch schedule as it's in TOPS. Does that make sense, JP?
That makes sense. That's helpful. But I'm still curious as to how often, especially for the newly designed approach to post office to plant transportation, how often that data is being really captured. But maybe that's something that's better for a CIR question.
So you're talking about the scan compliance, a trip arrival and stuff like that.
Well, and even you talked about the usage of geofencing and whether that automated data is really being collected or whether that geofencing isn't working in the more far-flung areas of the country.
Which is why we use both.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's all that I had for leg 1, and we can move on to leg 3.
Okay, so leg 3, right? Just going over the measurement approach. Essentially, it's a measurement from scanning, finalization at the destination plant, and then whether the product is getting, delivered to the customer's mailbox, in a timely manner or not, right? So that's what the leg 3 measurement is, essentially what we used to call last mile. So if you think about it, right, volume gets processed, with letters, they get DPS, flats, they may get sorted on the flat sorters, or bundles may get sorted on the bundle sorters, and the packages, they get sorted on the package sorters, right? And then they all get staged at the plant, and then they get loaded onto the truck, right? And then that truck, with both the containers of mail, flats, and then also packages, gets transported from the plant and goes to the post office. Post office, they do the unload scan, right? I mean, they may not do the unload scan, but they unload the containers, and then they got their DPS trays, they got DPS volume, they got packet volume, and then they hand that off to the carriers. Carriers goes out, and then they deliver the mail, right? They deliver, to the customer's mailbox. And the way the leg 3 measurement approach works is, we have sampling, right, which is what we do today as well. And if that address is selected to be sampled, and then the device breaks a geofence, we trigger on the device and ask the carrier to sample X number of mail pieces, or if flats being first, and then letters, right? So we'll be setting the sampling targets for each one of those 5-digit zip codes, right? And we'll be generating sampling requests aligned with those targets. We'll capture those samples, and where applicable, also utilize package delivery scans and those medium strata zip code cases, right? And then we determine whether the pieces are on time in leg 3 or not, and then leveraging clustering methodology where required to supplement or validate any statistical representativeness of the 5-digit service scores. And again, it's a shape-based approach. And if you think about it, it's letters, all of the letters that get processed together in the processing facility, right? So for example, DPS, right? We don't do a separate DPS processing for marketing letters versus single piece letters versus pre-sort letters, right? All of the volume letters, they get DPS together. All of the flats, they get processed together, right? And then when the carrier is delivering stuff to the customer's mailbox, right? They don't look at, hey, what product it is. They grab all of their letters, they put it into the mailbox. They grab all their flats, put it into the mailbox, and then they deliver packages, right? So and you're going to see some additional slides coming up where we talk about where the leg 3 profile went from us, currently, which is at the we've got 7 distinct profiles based on the mail classes, but then we go down to the shape level, right? So you got letters, you got flats, and then you got flats in bundles, because essentially what we're trying to do is align the measurement system with the actual operational flows, right? So all the letters, they get DPS together, flats, they are processed together, and then even our sampling requests, which are, we ask the carrier, hey, scan flats first and then letters. We do not ask them to scan single piece letters, pre-sort letters, marketing letters. Think about it, right? They got a few seconds at each one of those delivery points, right? If they go and start looking for those particular mail classes, they're going to be spending minutes and minutes, and obviously, which is not efficient, and it will be very costly to do so.
Actually, this does align with one of the lessons learned along the way in carrier behavior. For those that have been involved in this journey, when we first went out with the internal measurement system back in 2019, we basically had the nuance of scanning, letters then flats, right? We didn't act for each individual case, and we didn't hit our targets, right? It was a lesson learned, right? Because carriers are busy; they're out there delivering mail. And then when we reversed it to say scan flats first and then scan letters, lo and behold, we started getting our targets met, right? It's the nuances of understanding the operational behavior, in this case, specifically carriers, and aligning the profiles to match our operational processes with with the data that allows us to get what we need. And as Arsenal alluded to, right, we run all of our volumes, or not, by the way. This doesn't mean we're only capturing automation volume, right? If it bypasses automation, that'll be flushed out if they're scanning those pieces at the mailbox as well, right? So it all just basically is based upon how they handle the mail and how we process the mail, right? So whether, it's on automation equipment or handled manually, there's a letter sorting section at a plant as well as automation. Whether they're, handled in automation for a flat or handled manually, there's separate, process on how we do the flats. And then same thing with packages. All of that intelligence will be used in understanding our leg 3 and whether we have volume being delivered as expected.
I don't have any questions on this slide.
Yeah. To next. All right. I'm going to hand over to Jordan. Jordan, please unmute yourself.
Can everybody hear me okay? I want to make sure that
Yes.
everyone can hear. Okay, perfect. So let's talk about the reduction of sample groups. So in the interim order from the PRC, there was a reference made to a question about these sample groups going from 7 sample groups to 3 in the current state to 3 sample groups in the future, the proposed future state. I wanted to take a little bit of time and talk about the mathematical reasons why those reductions were needed to be made. So the table in this talks about basically what's going on. So the current state we report at the district level, there are 50 districts, there are 7 sampling groups, that's 350 attribute combinations is 50 times 7. And currently we're getting about 17 million samples per quarter for, based off of the approach. Okay, so that's the current state. When you move into the future state, we're going from a district level to a 5-digit zip code level. That increases our number of reporting regions from 50 to 40,000. If we did it at 7 levels, there'd be 280K. And based off of the leg 3 sampling approach that we've put into place, it would require about 34 million samples to be performed to meet statistical quality metrics. So that's about a 100% increase in sampling and the operational costs associated with that. So in order to offset the increase in regional specificity, we had to make some decisions to reduce that, and that's how we ended up at the current number of 16 million with the 3 sample groups and about 120K attribute combinations that we would have to report on it at a total level. I'm going to stop and let.
I just want to echo what I stated and what Steve also indicated, on the prior slide, is that this allows us to align our measurement system to the actual operational flows that are occurring, right? So just wanted to echo that.
I don't really have any questions on this slide. Thank you for sharing it.
Yep. Okay. This is the rural representation. This is also a response to what's in the into the interim order from the PRC. I want to start by saying that this was a concern we had from the beginning about rural representation. It was something that we looked into proactively and prospectively before doing this. And one of the big benefits of going to a 5-digit region-based approach is that you're going to get representation from more zip codes, particularly rural ones that are currently underrepresented. However, the PRC brought up a concern about zip 5s that have both rural and urban representation. So we wanted to take a moment to address that. We use a stochastic sampling model. So a stochastic model, for those who are not familiar, is one where you're prompting based off of probabilities based off of representative probabilities. And so you're going to have a different distribution of where the samples come from and where they are performed. So that is going to lead to some variance. So this range of outcomes table that we have below focuses on a quarter. And the reason we're doing it over a quarter is that there's more volume over a quarter, and it will take out some of the noise that you're going to have, especially in lowered sampled stratas. So again, I've put together 4 scenarios. These are examples. They are not representative of all regions. I want to state that, for the record. But in scenario 1, we have a large sample strata that is 30% of its volume density is rural. So based off of a margin of error and the way that the sample prompting would work, we would expect that the range of outcomes to be between 28 and 32%. Again, this would be 95% of the time based off a 95% confidence interval. So the second one, again, is large. You're seeing that it's still that 2% margin of error. So it's plus or minus 2% around that 15%. So it'd be between 13 and 17. For the medium, it would actually, the MOE would lower to about 3%. And it would be plus or minus 3% around that 25%, so 22 to 28. And then for the small, it's still at a 3%, and it would be 3% around that 10%. So plus or minus 3% is between 7 and 13%. So that is what our expected outcomes would be. Again, these are based off of 95% confidence intervals and the relative margins of errors that we anticipate receiving based on samples for those strata levels. I'm going to pause now and allow anyone to ask questions that they have.
So as I understand it, one of the differences between the leg 3 sample design and the existing system and the future state is in the current state, there is a urban and rural weighting in the last mile leg 3 measurement system. And in the future state, there's nothing in the formula for the sample or for the end result that has an urban and rural weighting. Do I have that correct?
So that is correct, but I think that is a mischaracterization, if I may address that specifically.
Right.
So you're right, because we're not reporting at a district level anymore. We have taken out the urban and rural weighting because that was necessary for a district level. At a zip 5, you're reporting on the zip 5. That zip 5 is, in most cases, it's either urban or rural. There are some that are both. And again, that is definitely something that warrants discussion. At the same time, because you're doing it at a bottoms-up approach, and there are samples that are going to be prompted at every zip 5, that weighting is now a natural inherent part of the roll-up. So it doesn't need to be a separate factor the way it did in the past.
So JP, this is basically comes down to that concept of going from the top down, trying to hit your targets versus measuring from the bottom and going up, right? We know the makeup of a zip code at the bottom level of geography, and if it's a reporting requirement, right, we can look at it from that perspective. But as far as a statistical model and accuracy perspective, going from the bottom level up gives us significantly more representation spread across all the spectrum of 5 digits versus the approach that we had at the district level, which is basically let's shoot down from the district level and try to hit urban and rural targets, if that makes sense. It's basically the same concept of a redesign, where when you go to the lower level of granularity, you've got a greater population and representativeness because you're covering everything at the 5 level.
The sample prompting model that probabilistically weighs individual delivery points. does not include, in the future state, does not include any data as to whether the delivery point has an urban or rural characteristic to it.
That's a true statement. Wait, time out. That's a true statement. And that's a true statement based upon what I stated below. Previously. But the aggregation, we have the information, right? And we can aggregate it up accordingly.
So the concept here I'm trying to discuss is the idea that if in every single 5-digit zip code, the delivery points that have the most volume are more likely to be sampled, and if the points that have the most volume are more likely to be urban or rural, either way, trying to avoid bias, trying to get representation correct. If there is a bias in the amount of volume going to one characteristic compared to another, then the probabilistic weighting of the sampling could lead to a result that is impacted by that volume distribution. Do I understand that correctly?
So I think what you're saying is that we are designing this according to volume to be reflective of the market dominant product. And I would offer from that perspective, yes, you're 100% accurate. And if you're looking for us to look at it by a specific delivery point type, urban versus rural, and not based upon volume distribution, then yes, we would be introducing bias based upon that approach.
That pretty much answers my question on this issue. When you, just to better understand this scenario outcome, the scenario planning you did here was basically to create some kind of, distribution within each of these strata to say what happens when we pick. Was it what happens when we pick the delivery points randomly, or was it what happens when we pick the delivery points based on our actual sampling probability model?
So are you referring to the table on the page? I just want to make sure I'm answering.
Yes,
yeah,
please.
this is based off of the way that the samples are being determined today. So when we ran the simulation, this is how we did it. Yeah.
So the margin of error calculations here, the range of quarterly sample outcomes, was that built off of some kind of Monte Carlo model to say, here's the number of rural and urban delivery points within each of these 4 strata?
No, it was built off of, it is a Monte Carlo simulation based off of, again, because this is a public hearing, we did not want to use any disaggregated data. So we created sample data to run through the process using a Monte Carlo style simulation based on the constraints we have here. So we intentionally picked 4 different, 4 different scenarios that cover different ranges of outcomes to show that. But yes, the results were consistent.
I think you'll probably see a question, CIR question on this lines, sure. And just trying to, so we don't have to dive too deep on it today, but how the margin of error calculation applies at the urban versus rural delivery point level. That math sounds a little bit fuzzy to me. I think you understand where I'm coming from on the issue.
That's fine, and if you submit a question, we will be happy to respond to it with the appropriate responses and data, etc., to support that.
All right, that's my questions on this slide. Thank you very much.
Yeah. No, thank you. All right. So again, I believe this is the last discussion item we have based off of the interim order. So there were questions asked about the sample strata, and again, they referenced representation bias and other issues as far as that goes. So this slide goes into detail about how the strata were formed, what the methodology was, and what the relative sample volumes are. So again, using the strata approach actually is a very powerful tool that we can use to drive statistical representation and also distribute our samples appropriately so that we can get more representation. So again, without getting into specific zip codes, roughly 10% of the zip 5s have 50% of the total delivery volume. So those were the zip 5s that were put into our large strata. The next group is a group of zip 5s that represents almost 49%. These are the medium, and it's a substantially, this is our largest group by number of zip 5s. And then we have our small group, which despite being almost 25% of total zip 5s, is really only coming in at 1% of volume. So by separating that, it allows us to optimize the usage of our samples to maximize representativeness. I have a couple of bullets underneath to basically talk about this. So using a sample strata approach achieves statistical significance for the most volume while optimizing operational costs. Again, the goal of this is to increase representation while staying within our relative cost structure. The large sample strata requires less sampling than its relative volume weight to achieve statistical significance, which allows us to distribute those samples that were currently tied up in those regions into other regions to reach statistical significance. The medium strata is sampled below statistical significant levels for weekly reporting, but will leverage supplement package data to reach statistical significance. And then our small strata is sampled below statistically significant levels for weekly reporting, and results will be imputed from higher level geographies within their cluster regions. That's the way it's designed. Again, this is talking about it on a weekly level. And I'm going to stop there for a second. I'm sure that JP might have a question or two.
Plenty of questions here.
Sure.
Let's start with the small strata.
Sure.
And this does tie into the next slide, and I don't want to get too far ahead of the clustering, but this is really the key issue here. For the small strata, the plan is not to have weekly statistical significance, but possibly to achieve monthly statistical significance. So when you report on a given 5-digit in the small strata for a given week, that's very likely to be a value that's imputed from a higher level of the clustering. But over the course of a month, and maybe over the course of a quarter or a year, as you get a higher number of samples in that weekly, in that small 5-digit zip code, you can go from having, if you looked at 4 weeks of individual leg 3 data for that small zip code, you would see 4 imputed values. But when you clicked on the monthly view and you expanded outward, that would go from being imputed to being specific to the samples taken in that zip code.
Yes.
And so this, I guess from the historical reporting perspective, if you had a district for leg 3 that had a weekly imputed value for last mile because there were not enough samples, my understanding was that imputed value would roll forward in the data, and you were taking each of the 52 weeks to get a yearly value for that district. But it sounds like this is a different approach where where everything is you have a weekly level report, and that can have one set of business rules, and a monthly level report, and that has another set of business rules, and then a quarterly report with a 4th set, and then a yearly one with a 5th set.
So to address your question, yes, the approach is different. I'm going to start there. Let's start with the simplest thing. Yes, it's different. Great. I am going to push back politely on having different business rules. The business rules are not actually different. They're the same, because what you're doing is you're saying, do we have a statistically valid number of samples upon which that we can report? Yes, no. If no, impute. If yes, report. Yes, it's not going to roll up perfectly in the monthly level for some of these where they've been imputed. That is something that we are aware of, and that is something that we have to acknowledge. But I don't view it as a different set of business rules. It's the same business rule applied over different periods of time.
I appreciate that sometimes the word business rules has a very specific meaning, and where there can be a little bit of I understand where you're coming from there. the thing that is a little bit confusing from a statistical significant perspective, if, for example, a small strata, 5-digit zip code, gets 3 samples in week 1, that's not enough for significance. 3 samples in week 2, that's not enough for significance. 3 samples in week 4, that's not enough for significance. 3 samples, now we've got 4 weeks at 3 samples each, that's 12 samples. Are those 12 samples now significant for the month when they were not significant enough for the week?
In the case that you've just outlined, the answer is no.
Okay.
You can refer to the Leg 3 MOE document that we filed. The answer is no. That does not reach a 95% confidence interval for Leg 3 with a margin of error at or less than 5%. So in that case, the answer is no.
So to put it another way, the number of samples you need to achieve significance, is that the same on a monthly basis as it is a weekly basis?
So
does that table apply across time in a way that it does not apply across location?
So I'm going to answer your question very, very straightforward. Yeah. You're asking about the MOE table. So the answer is yes. The MOE table, again, we used, just like we talked about earlier on Leg 1, we did a bunch of data analysis, made sure we were coming up with appropriate assumptions. But that static MOE number is applied to the weekly level, the monthly level, the quarterly level, because we used conservative estimates on what it was as far as the volume was. So there's not an individual volume, and yes, that if the metric in there, it's around 40. So if it's 40 is our 5%, 95% confidence interval, 5% MOE, that's the target for reporting. And again, that is a very conservative standard for some of these lower population ones, but we wanted to make sure that we were reporting on a justifiable number of data points for Leg 3. We wanted to make sure that what we're reporting is accurate and fair.
And that MOE table would apply to a large zip code just as it would apply to a small zip code. So it's kind of the exact same concern, but in reverse. If you had a zip code that had, 100,000 pieces in a week, and then millions of pieces in a month, and then, tens of millions in a year, if you achieve 40 samples in a zip code with tens of millions of pieces in an entire year, you would say those 40 samples are sufficient to measure that with high margins of error, or low margins of error, high margins of confidence.
So if you look at sample size calculation tables, they have asymptotic numbers that come in there. So as your volume gets higher, your population volume gets higher, the number does not grow proportionally within that. It actually starts to tail off and level off at a certain level. So again, using those level of assumptions where we're using this for basically a larger population, you can get there. So it's a standard. It's an acceptable way to do it. It's actually, I don't want to get into a political conversation, but I'm going to use this as a data point. I apologize. It's actually very similar to how they do survey polling. Sure. For things like what type of ice cream do you like? You'll have the same number of samples that you would have to take if you were doing a national poll. So if you're doing chocolate vanilla for a national poll, or if you're doing it for the state of Rhode Island or North Dakota, you're going to end up with the same number of samples, give or take.
I know that it appears that Manon has a question, so I would ask that she be put back on the screen now.
Sure.
Sorry, people, if I keep getting knocked off. And if you've already covered this, I apologize. I guess our IP address has changed and something at IT will fix later. Anyhow, so in terms of the imputation in the level for the Leg 3 sample, so for the monthly sample for the small strata, are you imputing like at the closest zip code at the district level? What if this for the Leg 3 imputation for these small samples, what are you imputing, and why did you not pick like an adjacent zip code versus a? So give me some rationale for your choice for the imputation group.
So it's based off of based off the clustering approach. I'm sorry for interrupting you while you were finishing.
No, that's fine.
It's based off of the clustering approach. So we set it up as clusters, and the reason why we use these clusters, which are groupings of zip files as opposed to a single individual zip file for proxying, is one, you have a larger base that you're going on. And again, going back to the methodology, all of the elements within that cluster aggregate up to form the statistical result for that cluster. And then because of the way that the process is controlled, it's predictive of the elements within. We did this instead of using an adjacent zip file because there are instances, and I think everyone on this call would be familiar, there are instances where adjacent zip files are neither predictive nor representative of the zip file that they're next to. And so we wanted to control for that. And by doing the clusters, we actually create a better control and better representation for that. It also, again, I don't like talking about catastrophic events, but we'll talk about it briefly. It also controls best for when you have a small, you have an event that impacts 2 or 3 adjacent zip files where none of them are going to be able to report. It still allows you to get an understanding of for how that larger region is actually operating.
So then just generally, would the grouping be, I mean, it could vary, but would be within a district, right?
So it's not always perfectly within a district, but it is perfectly, again, the clustering approach, it starts at, ours is based off of operational mapping. So RPDC regions are where you're starting at. So what zip codes, zip 3s, zip 5s are handled through this RPDC, that is your highest level cluster. You're going to get down into for leg 3, it's based off of the final processing facility, not as opposed to leg 1 is based off the cancellation. You get into that cluster again, which zip 3s, zip 5s are serviced by that, and then you get into the volume density clusters underneath there, which are handled at the lowest level, and that's the lowest level. But again, it is based off of that. And we did have one business rule in there, which I feel completely comfortable sharing, which is for the volume density clusters, the lowest level clusters, it was agreed upon as a business rule that those regions would be contiguous, that they would be touching, and that we would not be pulling, this zip code from this, part. So that they are contiguous regions. I just want to be very clear about that.
All right, thank you.
No, you're welcome. And thank you for the question.
A whole lot more, but I'll spare you.
While we're on this page, can you talk about the use of supplement packages in the medium strata only?
Yes. So would you like me to answer that as briefly as possible, or would you like me to be more detailed?
I mean, generally speaking, why would you only use package data in medium? Like, what's the sweet spot there of not using it across all of them? Is that too much data? Is it not?
No. That I wanted to make sure I was going to answer within the what you're looking for. So I'm going to actually explain why we don't use it for the large first, and then I'll get to the medium, and then I'll get to the small last. So for these large strata, the goal is, and the plan is, and the way the sampling is put together, is that we will be able to reach a statistically significant number based solely off of collected samples. We don't want to include package data there because it's not necessary. This is a measurement of letters, flats, and bundles. This is not a measurement of package performance, which you have talked about before. So packages should be used as a supplement when necessary. We've created a sample plan where that supplement is not necessary for the large strata. For the medium strata, the reason we're using it is we had to balance the goal of reporting for this incredibly large number of zip 5s with what the operational limitations are for how many samples we can perform, given the current samples we're performing today. So the business rules blend those two items, and we use the supplement packages because the supplement packages can serve as a portion of that weighting that is not, overwhelming and not non-representative, to supplement that data score, which is why we use it there. And then for the small strata, the sample plan is at a lower level, and it was designed so that, again, we could, for most of these, we could report on them at a monthly level, and if not a monthly level, definitely a quarterly level, with the exception of the ones that have truly low volume where you're not going to capture anything. But we did not want to have a situation where our entire reporting was based off of supplemental package data. In that case, for the smaller regions, would have been the case. And we did not think it was appropriate nor representative based on the data studies that we looked at and did.
Again, based on what you looked at and might look for more information on this, the CIR 7 response said that you would use package data in medium strata from all carrier routes, including special purpose routes. And can you talk about why it's necessary to use the special purpose route data?
So this is a completeness conversation when it comes to supplement package data. So by using all of the package data for those zip 5s, you actually eliminate any potential biasing as far as selection bias goes. So the decision was made to use all, because it would be representative of that total zip 5 and would not have any potential selection biases as far as weighing a sample. Because if we were selecting 20 pieces at random, there would be all sorts of potential for bias. I think and I'm using a hypothetical number, but I think you can understand that.
I guess what I don't quite understand is if you're using, you just said that you would be selecting package data, but if you're using all of the package data from a route, then you're not selecting anything there. I don't quite understand that.
No. You misheard me, or I misspoke. I'm not gonna.
I misheard.
We're using all of the delivery, the delivery point data for the packages within that region. All of the routes, all of the package data as a supplement. We are not selecting specific pieces. Do you
need to use the package data from package only routes in order to achieve statistical significance, or was it just because of completeness?
It's driven by completeness. It's about being reasonable. When you're measuring package performance as a supplement, it's fair to include everything. Again, there are biases introduced by not including it, and we wanted to avoid that.
When you looked at historical data, did you see differences in package on-time performance between special purpose routes and packages delivered with other mail?
On that one, I'll have to get back. I don't have it at my fingertips right now. I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay. That's all of the questions that I had on this slide.
Yep. All right. Thank you, Jordan.
Yep.
We advance to the next slide. All right. Hold on. Right.
I think it's the clusters.
Right. And this is where I think some of the questions that we had gotten on the prior slide from the public rep would also be addressed. So go ahead, Jordan.
Yeah, I'm going to be very brief on this one because it's very similar to leg 1. I don't want to basically repeat what we said before. So again, this is a cluster level approach. The public representative asked questions about the way they were structured, so we talked about that. The confidence intervals are listed here as far as what they are. And again, it's the same imputation rules as leg 1. The only difference between leg 1 and leg 3 as far as cluster design is leg 1 is based off of cancellation facility. Leg 3 is based off of finalization facility for delivery. So with that, I think we can move on to the next slide.
The only question I have here is the same concept as leg 1. If implementation goes well and the carriers respond successfully to the requested sampling, then the cluster imputation won't really be necessary over longer periods of time, like month, quarter, and year.
Yes, that's the expectation and the plan. Yes.
Okay. That's all I have right now.
Thank you for the question. Yeah. Again, we're going to talk about this. This is the statistical significance. Now, the statistical significance numbers are a little bit different for leg 3. We're cutting off at 13,830, and we're going to 99%. Again, we can go through. There are some examples of the roll up on this on slide 20, but again, this is very similar to the leg 1 explanation, and everything is, all of the MOEs are listed within our leg 3 sample MOE file, which shows when the crossover is for those numbers. I'm going to just, again, for the sake of brevity and the fact that this is very similar to leg 1, I'm going to keep it very short. And if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer.
No questions on this slide for me.
Perfect. All right, and here's the roll up. Okay, so we have a 5-digit zip code, 40 samples were performed. Again, I'm going to go through the weekly one, and then we can talk about the quarterly. I'm going to skip monthly unless there are specific questions about that. So 40 samples were performed and completed for this sample example 5-digit zip code. Again, this is an example. It's not representative of all zip codes, but it is an example. Gives us a 95% confidence interval, 5% MOE. At the 3-digit zip, it's 2,080, 95% with a less than 1% MOE. At the district, we're at 21,920 for the week, 99% confidence interval, less than 1% MOE. For the density cluster, it was 2,680, 95%, less than 1. I'm just going to, as you can see on this roll up, the roll up power is very powerful in leg 3, and you're getting very strong MOEs and very strong reporting levels at the week, even at the weekly level for the weekly density cluster and weekly district. Going into quarter, again, for this example 5-digit zip code, there are 520 samples performed. It's a 95% confidence interval with a 1% margin of error. And looking out, everything else is at a 99% margin of error with a less than 1% MOE. This is a very powerfully strong statistical sample for this singular example that we're using. But again, it is a very powerful roll up. There's a lot of value here, and as you can see, when the sampling plan is followed and met, there is a lot of predictive power here to give us representative reporting.
For the leg 3 sample design, the large zip codes, the sample design document says there's a 10% oversampling prompting. When we look at historical data, the success rate for leg 3 sampling seems to hover around 50-ish%. And so I'm curious whether there's any interaction between that 10% oversample and the success rate at a zip code level of the sampling.
So let's go through that document more specifically, because it also says in that document that is the preliminary expectation. So there is a preliminary baseline which is set at that level. And the reason we set it below, and again, I'm familiar with what you're talking about with the historical performance. The reason we set it below is that we want to see what the performance is at the individual zip 5s. If there is a lower sample compliance performance, the number of sample prompts will increase based off of that performance factor. We set the number at a lower target because for zip 5s that perform at a high level, we do not want to create unnecessary and additional sample prompts if they're not needed. So that is the basis for it. But again, the sample design document specifically says that they will be set there and that it will be reevaluated. So it is not a static number. It is a preliminary number.
Similar concept to leg 1, where for the large zip codes, they are currently very likely receiving more than 40 samples in measurement in the current measurement system. How will, have you tested this approach for leg 3? Did you do a pilot for leg 3 to kind of shift the samples from high volume 5 digits to lower volume 5 digits? And if so, how did that pilot go?
Yeah, the Jordan, I
not-
can jump into
Yeah.
again, the pilot we conducted was for leg one, right? Because that was a significant change, and you know, the leg one measurement methodology. For leg three, JP, as I indicated on the prior slide, right? Even today, right, we sample based on the shape, right? Where we, you know, on the device when it triggers, we ask for flats, fuzz, and then letters. And again, the pilot was conducted for leg one, but not for the leg three. But Jordan, you were going to add something else.
No, I was just going to say that we did not conduct a pilot for leg three. That was not performed, but no.
From an implementation perspective, are there concerns that the number of, you know, if you took the existing system and you applied it to zip fives, the large strata zip codes would have plenty of sampled volume to achieve significance, but it looks like you're going to scale down those requests substantially. Is there a concern that you could scale down the requests to a point that the zip five statistical threshold would not be met?
So I don't want to say that there's never a concern, because we don't speak in absolutes, but the answer is, in general, no, because we can adjust the additional sample requests based off of the performance of those zip fives. Again, the goal is to get a number of performed samples. The goal is about performed samples. It is about optimizing representation and response rates for the most 5-digit zip codes that we can get. So we did have to offset. We did have to decrease the number of samples that are being performed at these high volume sites so that we could redistribute them to get better 5-digit zip code representation across the entire country, which again addresses one of the preliminary concerns that we had a conversation about, which was bias. I mean, the best way to eliminate bias is to allow things to stand on their own. That is the benefit of a 5-digit zip code approach. A district level approach is going to be so heavily weighted towards the higher volume zip fives, which is a concern you yourself have brought up. So yeah, that's why we did it this way. And again, the additional sample request number can be reconfigured and will be monitored and reevaluated, as we have explained in our discussions and our responses to the CIRs.
In the sampling design methodology, one of the business rules talks about the information that will be captured for each delivery point selected on a given day. Two of the items here, the carrier route type and the delivery point type, do you expect you have the data capacity to maintain that data for a substantial period of time? Is that data from a database management perspective? Is that data added to the recorded samples, or once the sampling locations are identified and either successfully or unsuccessfully sampled, does that data, essentially get removed and replaced?
I think what you're referring to is the inventory process that we run every day in the morning to select the delivery points that need to be sampled. And Niket, you want to speak to that one from a technical perspective? But I think this is referring to the inventory process regarding the pieces.
Yeah, so your question on the technical side of it was, is there enough capacity to capture the inventory and not throw it away? The answer is yes. We have enough capacity to do that.
Great. I think that answers all of my questions on this slide as well.
Wait a second. Let me understand the question, JP.
Sure.
Are you talking from a historical over a period of time perspective to maintain it for every sample that we've ever done or are going to do? Because that's different than what I think their answer is.
I am asking basically whether after a week or quarter was done, whether you would be able to go back and identify the types of delivery points that have been sampled in terms of whether they're urban or rural, or whether they're business delivery points or residential delivery points, and the various other attributes that are, sampled at the granular level after the fact. So yes,
Yeah, so with the cap being the quarter, so the question, Niket, is do we have that capacity to do that for a quarterly level and a weekly level? I just wanted to make sure that this is not the daily inventory that we purge every day. Just to make sure you guys understood the question as I heard it.
Yes, the answer is yes.
Great. Thank you. No more questions on the slide.
Great. So, basically, I think we went over the entire process ad nauseam. I love hearing statisticians talk stats. That's always, let's just say, an acquired taste. But it's all good, right? No offense, Jordan. No offense, JP. It's just, rather dry to those that are on the sidelines sometimes. But it's all good, right? Because, as I said initially, the intent here is to be accurate and reliable and representative. And I do believe our approach is to be accurate, reliable, and representative, and also, to be cost effective. And I just want to, make sure that that's out there, right? So, when PSRA, went into effect, and basically the regulatory commission, came out with their order on, you must, and all of that granularity of measurement, right, which, we've been able to comply with. They also, said, hey, we want it at the zip code level, right? And when I met with the PRC, after that, we said, well, that's a little hard the way it's currently designed and would cost us a lot of money based upon the design as it exists, right? Or in the approach that we had at a district down level. And that was a true statement. It would, just be an ungodly burden to the Postal Service. However, when I continued to assess it, right? Because I told them in that first meeting, right? And the commissioners that were in the room, I said, it's an interesting concept. I'm going to say nothing is impossible with time and money, right? So time has progressed, right? The money piece, we're still challenged with money, right? But I do believe we came up with a methodology that allows us to get down to that 5-digit level. And is it going to be perfect? Surveys are not perfect, right? They all are based upon stats, right? What your population is, and what your sampling methodology is, your confidence interval, and what your margins of errors are. So, the only way you could be perfect is to scan every single piece at entry and scan every single piece at the mailbox, which of course, you would spend so much money you would never cover your costs, and then mail would be dead in a heartbeat. So the bottom line is, we came up with a methodology that would allow us to do this and get down to the 5-digit level based upon the PRC request. And I think the methodology does align with that PRC request that allows us to get down to a zip code level. Now, will we be able to report everywhere? As I stated originally, no, we won't, because there's not mail everywhere. And I wish we had it. But when you talk about how the mail is declining, and you think about the profile of mail, and I think that's another important aspect to understand here is, right, people don't mail everywhere from a location, and people don't mail from a location to everywhere. It's just not the nature of how correspondence works through the Postal Service these days. But I do believe as we continue to progress on this, we're going to get better. And as we continue to understand, our operational processes better and work on our sampling targets to align with those operational processes, it's going to get better. And not unlike when we moved over into the, into service performance measurement, it's going to be incredibly reliable and accurate at the district and quarterly level. It's when you start talking about 5-digit and week level that it becomes a greater challenge. And, just to, put it into context, just think about that, basically almost 2 billion pieces would need to be sampled annually to do it based upon the way we do it now, going down to the 5-digit and week level. And that's just not a cost effective. So, I appreciate the time to explain our methodologies and our processes. And, I've got a couple of takeaways here, right? Because it wasn't clear in our language, and we'll clean that up, right? And thanks for pointing that out. But other than that, I think, this is a viable approach to be able to align with the PRC's request to measure down to the 5-digit zip code level, and also be cost effective at the same time. We lost everyone.
I think that sums it up. I don't have any more questions. Lauren, do you want to sign us off? Oh, it looks like Mr. Rayner has his hand up.
Hi, good afternoon. Mike Raker on behalf of USPS. Just have a couple of closing comments. I think we addressed all the questions without any follow-ups. I think Mr. Deering noted a couple of takeaways for us generally. I think there was, but I do think there was one specific question about package data, performance of package data. So if we would be happy to respond to that, if you could send that in a formal follow-up request. And I think JP mentioned that there may be some additional questions coming our way as well. So certainly we'll stay tuned for those. But I think that in my takeaway, that was the only one follow-up. So we'll certainly be happy to respond to that.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Raker. We will be providing a CIR probably shortly thereafter for the Postal Service to review and respond. Well, with that,
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we will close today's technical conference. Again, wanted to thank everyone for the productive discussion. For transparency and accessibility purposes, the recording will remain online at the Commission's YouTube channel, and the Postal Service's slides are filed in the docket number here, RM 2024-9. Thank you very much and have a great day, everyone.